Welcome back to Dirt Obsession, everyone, or welcome for the first time to those of you more interested in the dirt machines of the two-wheeled variety. Today we wanted to introduce the projects that we spent the majority of the winter on, the 2024 CRF300L and the KLX300 builds. Over the winter, while scouring the aftermarket for products and now finally being able to get out and give these bikes a proper test, we learned a lot about the difference between Honda's CRF300L and Kawasaki's KLX300. These are both super fun machines, capable of highway speeds on the roads, and obviously perfect for the roads less trodden. We're going to split some hairs in comparing what the experience is like with each of them, but the important thing to remember is that we bought both because they're both great machines. Let's start with some notes on the build and aftermarket. The first major difference between the CRF and the KLX is the aftermarket support. There's a ton of aftermarket parts for the CRF, in most cases from a variety of companies. We had more choices for exhaust, pegs, levers, protection, and other accessories, as well as the oversized Acerbis tank, and it's a lot harder to find parts for the KLX. We found some, of course, but options were limited. Limited options made us skip items we would have liked. An IMS tank, for example, was a ridiculous $400. Power is going to be something most guys address first on smaller displacement bikes like these. For performance on the CRF, we added a full Graves exhaust system with a programmer and widened the air take with the CRF300 intake to let the CFR breathe. We both really like the growl and look of the Graves. It's a nice rumble without being too loud or overpowering.
Dude, this Graves sounds awesome.
I couldn't tell you the power increase from stock, but coming from the CRF300L, I can confidently say the 300L is an appropriate evolution of the 250L. It's better in every way with similar performance mods, and what immediately stood out was the buttery smooth gearbox. The CRF shifts easily with no clunks or missed gear, and it's the kind of refinement we're really only used to seeing in higher-end European adventure bikes. On the CRF, first and second gears in stock gearing are pretty short. First is essentially useless except for starting in awkward positions. Second is shorter than I expected as well, but the CRF has enough torque to lug to very low speeds in second gear and pull from low RPMs in third. Occasionally it requires a little more clutch work than the KLX, but it certainly doesn't have any flame-out issues or inconvenient stalling. Again, performance options on the KLX were limited. We went with a Barker's exhaust and a Dobek-style programmer. We also eliminated the secondary intake valve in the throttle body, which by itself improved the power. The Barker's is pretty screaming loud, especially at high RPMs, but that's kind of a Barker's thing, and it looks great on the KLX.
It is loud as fuck.
The gearbox on the KLX is fine. I probably wouldn't even mention it if the CRF wasn't so good, but it's definitely not as smooth as the CRF. First and second gears are much taller on the KLX, which we appreciated on the trails.
First gear is so much taller and more rideable and this kind of stuff. Because that one, once you get started, I never shifted back to first again, ever. Yeah, just clutch it and pull it in two. This one, first gear, actually has some utility.
If you start on a hill, you can gain some momentum before having to shift up from first, and the KLX rarely needed clutch finesse on tighter trails. We noticed the KLX revs a lot faster, and it seems to be torquier down low. At the top end of the gearbox in 6th gear is where the next significant difference occurs. The KLX keeps its torque in 6, where 6 feels more like an overdrive for cruising on the CRF. We didn't get up that high on the trails, of course, so it's really a difference in road manners.
Man, this bike on this kind of stuff, it just feels right at home. This is like what it's for sure. Oh, this is a sweet bike. Now I might be getting a KLX.
Next, let's talk about the ergonomics, weight, feel, and balance of the bikes. The bike's dimensions are relatively similar, but we could tell some noteworthy differences from the saddle. The CRF seat is noticeably wider and firmer. We found the KLX a little softer and more comfortable, even though it was noticeably more narrow. The rider triangle feels more cramped on the CRF. The foot pegs feel higher, which makes the bike feel a little taller. The biggest difference we found in balance and feel between the CRF and the KLX was the weight distribution and center of gravity. The KLX holds its weight noticeably lower, which makes it feel more stable on the trails at low speeds. The trade-off is that somehow it feels heavier than the CRF, even though it isn't. It also makes the steering more deliberate, and by that I mean it tracks where it's pointed very well, and it isn't thrown offline by obstacles very easily.
This thing is so tractable, man. It stays in its line so well. Or that one's like, that one's not, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, coming up through stuff like that, you like weren't sure what's in the rut with like roots and stuff. That thing just skips and bounces all over the place. This thing's just like holding a perfectly straight line through that stuff. It's crazy. The difference is kind of wild.
The CRF weight feels like it's distributed more evenly throughout the bike, which inevitably raises the center of gravity and makes it feel a little bit lighter. It doesn't track lines quite as well as the KLX, and it seems more bothered by rocks and roots. An actively engaged rider might appreciate the flickability of the CRF, especially at a moderate pace, but point-and-go riders will definitely find it less predictable than the KLX.
Alright, so we switched back just to confirm what we were feeling and the difference between the two. The CRF feels way lighter, the KLX feels way more planted. And what we were talking about is like the CRF off-road, like obviously it's made to do this, so it's good at it, but it feels slightly more like a fish out of water when compared to the KLX. The KLX feels like CRF feels like it can do this kind of stuff. The KLX feels like it was made to do this kind of stuff with a lower weight and center of gravity, and it's torquey. Just a different trail experience for sure. It was much more purpose-built for trails.
Worth noting is that we both experienced significantly more vibrations through both the handlebars and the seat on the CRF. There was virtually no vibrations in the bars of the KLX, which is kind of surprising from a torquey single.
Yeah, so when we were just talking about the vibrations, like, I want to say the CRF is a better road bike, but the KLX, it feels smoother vibration-wise, and we both noticed the CRF was making our hands a little bit numb.
Also, the KLX turning radius is noticeably tighter when making U-turns on the trails.
That thing will move, but it's kind of like, are you sure? Okay. Where this thing's like fucking bouncing everywhere. So I guess, you know, with that, it's kind of weird that that is the much decidedly tighter turning of the two, but it's true, it is. It definitely turns tighter. It does what you want it to, that's for sure.
Next, let's talk about suspension, because this is something most guys are going to address on both bikes. The CRF got a YSS rear shock with a stiffer spring and a Racetech front spring in the fork. The KLX got a stiffer rear spring and a Racetech front spring in the fork as well. Stock suspension was much better on the KLX, especially for heavier riders. Riders over 180 pounds can expect to need to upgrade the CRF suspension. I'd say the CRF300 stock suspension is marginally better than it was in the 250L, but our budget shock upgrades have far less adjustability than the Öhlins rear shock I put on my 250L. Power and suspension would be our first priorities if we were to do these builds over again. Both of these bikes are incredibly fun and easy to ride. They're both light with decent power and very capable both on and off road. That said, at the end of the day, we both felt like the KLX felt more trail oriented. We liked the torque, the taller lower gears, and the low center of gravity. It also has a more raw feeling that we can't quite put our finger on, but we attributed it to a more dirt-oriented design. Certain aspects of the CRF feel more refined. The gearbox is definitely a standout, and I personally like the gear indicator and fuel gauge on the instrument cluster that the KLX lacks. The bikes are fairly evenly matched on the road, but the gearbox, information, and available larger tank would make me choose the CRF if my focus was more on touring. I'd live with the vibrations and cramped rider triangle for those advantages, but I wouldn't be thrilled about it. If the KLX had more information on the gauge cluster and a little bit more aftermarket support available, the choice would be easy for us. For now, we hope we gave you guys enough information to make an informed buying decision. Thanks for checking out the video, guys. We hope to see you again right here on Dirt Obsession.